Well, welcome to you all to another episode of the Business Builders podcast. Today's guest is a very experienced industry professional, Wayne Sandford. So I'm very interested to hear his story. And with no further ado, welcome, Wayne. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, Ray, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Not at all. I'm interested because obviously I don't know your background, so I'm really interested to hear how you got into construction, what made you get into construction. So over to you, dear boy.
Thank you very much. Well, I sit here today as a chartered construction project manager, business owner, and construction and trade-based business coach and mentor, effectively. The journey to get here was long. I'm now into my fourth decade in the construction industry. I know I don't.
You're wearing it
don't
well.
look, I know I don't look anywhere near old enough. I know that, Ray. Thank you very much. Checks in the
Got a
post.
good surgeon.
Yeah, I mean my journey in construction goes all the way back to when I was 11 years old. When I walked onto my first building site. All my family are from a construction or trades background. And as I said, I walked onto my first building site at the age of 11 and instantly knew that's what I wanted to do. Go forward to sort of leaving school. I wasn't particularly gifted at school like many people in the construction industry. We tend to be more vocationally motivated rather than academically. So I eventually started an apprenticeship in the M&E sector. So plumbing, heating, and electrical is my specialism, if you like.
My dad's a plumber. So
Is he?
yeah.
Okay.
One of my sons as well.
One of your sons as well. Well, they picked a good industry. So I did my apprenticeship. I was very, very lucky in the terms that I did what we would call an old-fashioned apprenticeship now. My apprenticeship was effectively 6 or 7 years, really. The old boy that I did my apprenticeship with, a guy named Alan, he was in his 70s. He was 72 when I started.
Oh, wow.
And he was nearly 80 when I finished. Yeah, when I started with him, he was 72. And great guy. And obviously, I'm going back over 30 years. So, he's been in that industry in the good old days where the plumbers still did all the lead work and, the lead on the roof, etc., etc. So I'm incredibly grateful that I had that opportunity to do what I would call an old-fashioned
To get a full range. Yeah.
100%. And to learn from someone that had spent most of their time in the industry where money and time wasn't the biggest motivator, which it is now. When old Alan started, it was all about sort of taking pride in your work, doing quality work, and I really benefited from that, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. So I did my apprenticeship with Alan, 6 or 7 years. Then, as a lot of guys do, think, I can go and do this for myself. So, off I went, bought myself a van. I thought, right, I'm ready to go. And it was great, for a good few years. It was fantastic. I was predominantly doing sort of plumbing, heating, mechanical services for a number of years, but the calling from the construction side of the industry was always there because of my.
Actually, on the heating side,
Yeah.
obviously now you've got gas safe.
Yeah.
Did they have such strict boiler rules and heating rules back then, or did that evolve as you kind of went on time?
It evolved. I mean, when I first got into the industry, it was a governing body called Corgi, which is still in existence today, albeit that it's not the government recognised body for the industry. It changed over to gas. I mean, that was that. There's always something I struggle to understand. That we spent the best part of 40 years getting the Corgi name, the Corgi brand, and everything into everybody's minds. And then a simple government tender process changes all of that, and it went to an outsourcing company called Capita, or GasSafe as we publicly know it. And they still, they still govern the industry today. So it's always been a heavily regulated industry, much more heavily than, say, the electrical industry, for example. I mean, the electrical industry, it wasn't until 2005 with the introduction of Part P that regulation and governance became a thing for electricians. Prior to 2005, you could have been a hairdresser one week and an electrician the following week, and there was nobody to stop you doing it. So I mean, that brought its own set of challenges to the industry. But yeah, to answer your question, it's always been a heavily regulated industry, and rightly so. Gas is obviously a very dangerous thing to work with. Is it as good now as it was then? Not so sure. It's now run by a commercial entity rather than an organisation with an interest in the industry.
Yeah, the motives are different at the end of the day.
Motives are very different. It comes back on that. It comes back to that time and money thing that I raised before. So whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, I don't know. I mean, we can only gauge that by the number of incidents, serious incidents there are in the gas industry, which thankfully are still minimal. So it's an industry that does require regulation.
Okay.
And the prerequisite work. I mean, a lot of people might not know, but every gas engineer has to go back to college every 5 years and completely redo all their exams. And that's something we have to do. I think we'll see a similar thing introduced into the electrical industry in the not too distant future. And I think that's a good thing. Yeah. Regulation of the industry is very important. So going back to my story, there I was. I'd done my 6 or 7 years. I was young, full of the confidence, or should that be arrogance, of a 20-something young man. And I was ready to take on the world, and off I went. And fantastic. So I worked predominantly in the plumbing and heating industry for a number of years, as a subcontractor to larger companies, but also direct to client, in both the domestic and the commercial sectors. But the calling to the construction industry was always there. I was surrounded by family members that had building companies, et cetera. And the building industry, it's not a difficult industry to do well in, and it's not a difficult industry to grow in, and you can grow very, very quickly. If you can conduct yourself professionally, if you can look after your clients, if you can operate with a degree of integrity and professionalism, then you will do very well. I was always very lucky in that sense, in terms of I knew how to look after people, I knew how to treat people, I was very professional. What I didn't know was a lot of the specifics around running a business, and specifically in the construction sector. So I branched out into building. We grew very, very quickly. Predominantly, I was doing sort of domestic contracts, refurbishments, loft conversions, extensions, that sort of thing. We then sort of worked our way up through the contract size, if you like. So we'd started smaller, we started growing, we were taking on larger and larger contracts. And
with those larger ones, were they still residential?
They were still
Moved
residential.
in commercial.
We did touch on the commercial sector. I mean, under the construction umbrella, you'd think, or most people think, that there's not an awful lot of difference between commercial and residential construction. Poles apart.
Exactly.
Absolutely poles
Indeed.
apart. With residential, you're dealing. It's far more emotive when you're dealing with the residential sector, because you're dealing direct to client, and you're apart from the children and the partner, you're probably dealing with the two most important things in that person's life: their home and their personal finances. So you are connected to the bill payer, if you like, whereas in the commercial sector, there's a hierarchy, and as a contractor, main contractor or subcontractor, you're you're bottom of the pile effectively. You've got all your professionals above you, your architects, your structured engineers, your solicitors, various other bits and pieces. In the commercial sector, if things go wrong, then the contractors or subcontractors are the last consideration. So you are incredibly vulnerable in the commercial sector. So yes, I did dip my toe in that water, got my fingers burnt, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But yeah, as in terms of the contracts grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, and we started getting noticed by some of the bigger companies, and we got approached by one central London-based company, and they bought a lot of property, and they were doing a lot of work around sort of Pimlico, around Dolphin Square at the time. Don't know if you know the area, but they're sort of 6-7 story townhouses. Yeah. So we spent quite a bit of time sort of talking to those guys, striking up a relationship, establishing a rapport. Everything went great, and for probably 3 years we were doing townhouse after townhouse, and that was, taking the 6-7 story property, converting it into flats, putting another level on top, mansard roof. And we were doing those one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it was great. It was fantastic. The economy was doing well. Whilst this was going on, we still had all of our smaller projects, in our local area, the extensions, refurbs, lofts, all that sort of thing. We were going great guns. We were turning over. I mean, we grew. In our first year of working with that company, we grew from about 1.5 million to about 3.5 million. So it was quite a rapid growth.
Were those projects that you were doing in the townhouses, were they negotiated or tendered?
They were tendered initially, but then we struck up a good relationship.
Standard practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So once we'd established ourselves, once we got a couple of projects under our belt, we delivered them on time, on budget, and to a good standard. Everything relaxed a little bit, which at the time was for me as the business owner, it was great. All I cared about was, is there work next week and is there money in the bank,
And by now you were off the tools?
By now I was off the tools,
Okay.
yeah. So I've kind of condensed probably 10 or 12 years there in terms of my journey through the plumbing and heating company into construction, and then the growth of the construction company.
Just on that point, when you made the decision to come off the tools and obviously start being on the business, not in the business, was there a particular point, whether it be turnover, whether it was workload, was there a conscious decision to come off the tools, or was it something that kind of you just found yourself evolving into?
That's a really, really good question, because I mean, you just mentioned the on the business, not in the business, and that's quite a statement that people need to understand what that statement actually means. I would say I came off the tools at that point, not because I wanted to work on the business, but because the administration side of the business, when the business grew to that side, required somebody to do it. So I came off the tools because there was a more important job I needed to do within the company. Would I approach it the same way now? Absolutely not. I have a hell of a lot more experience, and I've invested heavily in myself in terms of educating myself and understanding business. And looking back, it was a decision made out of necessity. So that's a perfect example of the business controlling me rather than the other way around. So that was really the reason I came off the tools at that point. But I didn't come off the tools to operate my business strategically. I came off the tools to do what needed to be done in my business to keep it going at the current rate of progress, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you made one really important point there, where I think it was Jim Rohn that said you should always work harder on yourself than you do on your business. And a lot of business owners, construction business owners that evolve from the trades, they don't always take that point on board. You need to invest. You need to keep learning, keep stimulating and learning. So great that you mentioned that, because it's a key point.
It really is, and it's not something that I learned at the right time in my career.
Yeah.
Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I needed to seek help. I knew what I knew, but you don't know what you don't know. And, and with, as I say, with the benefit of hindsight, looking back then, I really, at that point when that necessity for me to come off the tools, that should have sparked me to go, right, I know how to fit a boiler. I know how to build a house. I'm now stepping back to run a business. Do I know how to run a business? Again, the 20 or 30 something by this point, arrogance. Yeah, I can do that. I can do that. So I effectively became MD, chief of admin, chief of HR, chief of accounts, all of the hats, all of the hats. It's one of those things, and it's something that construction businesses and trade businesses, we get into the trades, or we get into construction because we want to be a carpenter, we want to be a plumber, we want to be a sparks. You might be the best sparks in the world. You've been to college, you've got all the technical skills, you've done your apprenticeship. Yeah. You then go out and start working for yourself, just like I did. Yeah. The minute you take that decision to launch your own business and work for yourself, you're not just the plumber. You're the plumber, you're the HR manager, you're the managing director, you're the sales and marketing guy, you're the accounts guy. What a lot of people do is they fall into the trap of trying to do all of those jobs very, very badly. As construction business owners, or just as business owners, I think we all have an element of control about us. We if we relinquish any control, it just puts us in an uneasy position. Does that make sense?
We can always do it best. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. The number of times I've looked in the mirror or sort of said to myself, how do I do this? I now know that's the wrong question to ask myself. I'm effectively, I was challenging myself back then to say, right, I need to become an accountant. I need all the knowledge that an accountant has, but I need it in the next 5 minutes. That's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. But when you're in the moment, you think, right, I've got to do this. I've got to do that. How do I do this? How do I do this? And you just need to change that 3-letter word for another 3-letter word. It's not, how can I achieve this? It's, who do I need to help me achieve this?
Yeah. Dan Sullivan, is it?
Who, absolutely, not how? Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Who, not how. But it's so key, Ray. It's so key, because you cannot be the expert in everything.
No.
You cannot know what you need to know about everything. And if you take that decision to right, I'm going to handle the accounts, I'm going to handle the HR, I'm going to handle the marketing, it's a slippery slope to nowhere. It really, really is. Because you can't do it. Yeah. Do what you do best. Either, you either stay on the tools and stay that excellent tradesman that you are, or you take the decision to become the business owner. But it's so important that what you've got to recognise is you need that help to make that transition into becoming that business owner, and you can't do it on your own.
Yeah, I think Richard Branson said that he surrounds himself with people far greater knowledge than himself in certain disciplines, and when they squeeze harder, he shoots higher. So, it's you've definitely got to overcome that ego, haven't you, to actually put your hand up and say, I need some help.
100%.
Who can do this best for me?
100%. Yeah. And I think it's more. I think it's more an issue in the construction trades businesses as well, because when you're doing a project, you control everything. So it's natural to us to want to control everything. And where so many businesses fail is they don't recognise that they don't have the skills or the ability to control that part of their business. And that's where things start to fall down.
Yeah. But they don't actually allow for that in their pricing either, do they? Because they only see what they're doing on site. They don't allow that they've got all these overheads that you need to factor in.
Absolutely. I find there's people are in two courts there. They either completely ignore their overheads. Certainly sole traders or very, very small companies, they will charge their time. If they want to earn £200 a day, for example, that's what they'll charge out. And they're happy because they're getting their £200 a day. But what they don't realise is that there's all these other overheads and costs accruing in the background that have not been catered for. And without that capital allowance for overheads and profit and the operating costs of the business, of which there's many. Again, you're on a slippery slope to nowhere, because it's only a matter of time before all of a sudden your cash flow's gone, you can't meet your bills, and effectively you're insolvent. So yeah, it's so important, so important.
Yeah. So when you had your construction company, you're doing the townhouses in Dolphin Square area. Where did your journey go then? Where did it go from there?
I was living the dream. I was living the dream. There was plenty of money in the bank. Clients were happy. Projects were going well. Guys on site were reasonably happy. Everything was, there was sufficient money available, sufficient cash flow, so that although there were problems there, one, I didn't have the knowledge to recognise them early enough. Two, because things were going well and the money was flowing, they weren't rearing their head.
Yeah.
They were just quietly sitting there in the background plotting away. And so we ticked over up at Dolphin Square for a number of years, about 3 years. This was 2005, 6, 7.
Oh, the recession.
Well done. Yeah, I was just about to say. We all know what. No, that's all right. We all know what happened in 2007, 2008. Yeah. So we were absolutely flying, and I never forget. This is about 3 years into this particular relationship. It was a Tuesday morning, and we used to go for there was a lovely little cafe just around the corner, and they loved us because we spent 3 years going there every day, spending a fortune. And we were just about to go for breakfast, and the phone rang, and looked at the phone, and it was the guy that I'd built, spent 3 years building up this relationship with, and so I answered it. Why wouldn't I? And I never forget that. Even now that I'm describing it, I'm coming out in goosebumps, and this is best part 20 years. Never forget that phone call. It was a very short phone call. Hi, how you doing? Pretty much one sentence. And the sentence was, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but we've ceased trading. Ooh. That was the main contractor that we were getting all of our business from. As I say, it was, there were larger economic issues at play here, but we'd ceased trading, and in that moment, I just it's difficult to say how I felt in that exact moment, because it took me a little while to just process what he'd said, and it was a very short phone call. Hung the phone up. And I actually didn't say anything to anyone, even my business partner at the time. I didn't say anything to. I took the rest of the day just to process exactly what had been said to me, and effectively, when he said to me, "We've ceased trading," that was effectively him saying, "There's no more money coming." At that time, they owed us £347,000. Not an insignificant amount of money.
Well, look at what's that factor today's prices. Back then, that's probably
I've not done the maths, but
yes.
£500,000 or just over that. And whilst we had other projects and other things going on, we weren't of a sufficient size to absorb that. So effectively, in that one short 40-second phone call, everything I'd spent 15 years building came crashing down around my ears. The worst part of that day, the phone call wasn't even the worst part of that day. the worst part of that day was going home. And I went home, and I mean, I've been with my wife now for 24 years. Incredible woman. Love her dearly. And I walked through the door, and she greeted me with that smile that she always greeted me with, you know, that sort of didn't matter how bad my day had been. You know, I'd walk through the door, she'd smile, and it just kind of made me feel that everything was going to be okay. I'd just shut the door on it and everything would be okay. Except this time it wasn't. It wasn't. Very long story short, I lost everything. You know, we went from you know, nice house, nice car, couple of really nice holidays every year, effectively to taking my family from house to house on a weekly basis, keeping on other people's floors.
Oh wow!
It was pretty horrendous. You could probably hear in my voice now that you know,
no,
it's
I
not something.
see it in your eyes.
Yeah,
it's not great memories.
It's not great memories, and it's. I don't think it's anything. You know, I wouldn't say you get over something like that. I mean, it resulted in me losing everything, as I say, the houses, the cars. I mean, that's looking back now. It's not, you know, the houses, the cars, the holidays. That's not what's important. But at the time, especially as a young man, that's what you aspire to.
Yeah.
That's what you think is important. But I had 2 young children at the time as well. One was 11, one was 9. And it was tough. We spent a number of months effectively sofa surfing. And I really, really struggled back then. I just could not rationalise in my head how I'd gone from, you know, a place of abundance to absolutely nothing overnight. And it took me months and months. And if it hadn't been for my wife, honestly, Ray, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now. And
wow.
That's not me, you know, that's not me exaggerating to make a point. That's genuinely how I felt. You know, to drag your wife and 2 young children round to anyone that was prepared to show you a little bit of charity, to go from business owner that everybody admired to that,
to a lifestyle,
in a 40-second phone call, it was tough. It was tough.
Yeah, I suppose you feel as if you're letting everybody around you just down. And
100%, 100%. I mean, I'm fairly traditional, as is my wife, and you know, it's, you know, I was the business owner, I was the breadwinner, I looked after her, I looked after the kids. That was my job, you know, that was my role. That gave me purpose in life. It made me feel me. Like many business owners, we put our heart and soul into our business. For a lot of business owners, there's not an awful lot else going on in their life, especially in the early days, because so much of their energy is put into their business. So for me to go from that to that was, it was horrendous.
Did you, if you don't mind me asking, did you kind of go down mental health issues, or did you manage? You've obviously, it's great that you've managed to come back and where you are now, but at the time, was there a knock-on effect, like a concertina effect?
100%, 100%. And that's why I said to you, you know, if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't be sitting here now, because I went from a place of empowerment to a place of vulnerability and uselessness overnight. I couldn't look after my wife. I couldn't look after my kids. I couldn't do the very things I needed to do to satisfy the fibre of my being. You know, that's what I was. That was what I was put on earth to do, to run a successful business and look after the people I love. And that was taken away from me in a heartbeat. And I spent months and months and months effectively feeling sorry for myself. Still, even at that time, I knew what had happened, obviously, but I didn't understand how it had happened. And that was the question I was sort of wrestling with myself. I mean, effectively, I felt sorry for myself for a long period of time, and then just one day I just looked in the mirror and I just had a word with myself, and I said, "Look, you've been wiping your nose for the last 3 months. Your wife, your kids are still behind you. You owe them a little bit more than that. You need to stop feeling sorry for yourself. You need to get back up on your feet and crack on." Excuse me. So that's what I did effectively. But I wanted to understand what had gone wrong, how this had happened, how I could have gone from being so successful to having nothing overnight. So I looked at the way I'd run the business. I looked at my role in the business. I looked at every aspect of the business, and we had, as I've already mentioned, my background's in M&E, and everything that we did from an M&E perspective, from a construction perspective, the carpentry was spot on, the roofing was spot on, everything was bang on, because I knew what I was talking about. If one of the chippies was trying to spin me a line to take a shortcut, I'd catch him out because I knew that.
Yeah.
What I didn't understand was how I'd gone from hero to zero overnight from a financial perspective and a business perspective. So I spent quite a lot of time looking at that, and all of a sudden I identified all these new roles within my business that I didn't really know they existed. Sales and marketing. What's sales and marketing? Sales and marketing in the construction industry, as I touched on earlier, it's very easy to make a success of yourself in the construction industry if you do things correctly. Therefore, not a lot of people spend an awful lot of time on sales and marketing. That's a whole nother conversation, because the lack of sales and marketing, or the lack of focused sales and marketing, can cause all sorts of problems in itself. But yeah, I knew what was sales and marketing, what was HR. There were so many things in my business missing back then. Materials, perfect example. We had no procurement process. We had no purchase order process. We had no materials tracking process. We literally picked the phone up and ordered 25 grand's worth of materials.
I'm so glad you've mentioned that, though, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are running construction companies or tradesmen, and just by listening to your story, and obviously I really, thank you so much for opening up like that, because I'm sure there's people in a similar situation, and if they can invest in themselves and learn the things that you're relating to now, hopefully, because as we know, suicide rate in construction is 3 times higher than the national average. We can avoid, and we can help people grow their businesses so they can have a lifestyle under controlled circumstances. So I really appreciate you. So please carry on with that. It's great.
Yeah, and you're right to highlight that suicide statistic, because I could have been one of those statistics quite easily. If I didn't have my wife and kids with me, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that I would have looked for an easier way out.
Yeah, but I suppose now you've been there, you've been at the lowest. I suppose you can flip that on its head and use it as a catalyst to, I'm never going to go back there. I can help other people from being there. But at the time, I've family members and stuff, I've kind of been exposed to depression and things like that, and it's a vicious cycle. So I'm so pleased. I wouldn't have had a guest otherwise. I'm so pleased that you go. But no, on a serious note, it is a very important point, and I really appreciate you mentioning it.
No, it is a really important point, because, and it's so easy to fix. It's so easy to fix. But the problem with the construction and trades industries is we are naturally very reactive. As a tradesperson, how many times have you find yourself having to do multiple trips to the suppliers during the course of the day? Lost time on the tools, fuel costs, wear and tear on the van. Are you getting those materials at the best prices? No, you're not. You're getting them because that's the builder's merchants that's the closest, and you need to get back to site. It sounds silly, but if you say that, across the course of a week, several hours lost off site, plus the cost of the diesel, plus potentially the elevated cost of the materials, you could be talking, a few £100 a week for a one man operation potentially.
And that's not in the tender price.
That's not in the tender
submission,
price.
yeah.
No, that's not in the tender price. But say £300 a week. That's best part of £1,000 a month. That's £12,000 off your bottom line a year, just because you're not organised.
Yeah, it's frightening, isn't it?
It's scary.
Yeah.
But what's even scarier is the number of businesses out there or business owners out there that don't realise this stuff. That's just one really simple, straightforward example. Now, if you apply that to all the other areas of your business, depending on the size of your business, you're throwing away tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds a year.
Yeah.
Just because, one, you're not learning what you need to learn, using the people you need to use, and applying the systems and processes that will prevent all of that stuff from happening.
Yeah, and invariably they're paying out. They're not allowing for the cash gap. They're paying out before they're getting the money in, and because of the idiosyncrasies within the payment structures within construction, it can be one delay can put people out of business if they're not structuring it properly.
Absolutely, and I mean that feeds into a whole conversation around risk, and the allocation of risk, and where there's significant risk in any contract, whether that contract's £500 or 500,000. There's risk associated with that. Most business owners don't even acknowledge the existence of that risk, let alone take steps to mitigate it or share the risk between client or professionals involved or the main contractor. And that was a huge thing. I mean, I was incredibly overexposed. I now know. I was incredibly overexposed, but the understanding of risk is huge.
Yeah,
absolutely huge.
Yeah, incredible. With regards to so you're in you've been through that awful time. The construction company had unfortunately folded for external reasons. Where did you go then? You've come out of your depression. Thank God for your wife and family. And where did you go? Where did the journey take you then from there?
So the journey from there, I was never going to do anything else. So I was always going to go back into the same industry. But I probably spent about 2 or 3 years effectively just operating as either a sole trader or a very small team.
Yeah.
Where I could do contracts that, met my financial needs, but didn't scare me too much.
In the building, not
in the building, in
right,
the
okay.
plumbing, heating, building.
I see. Okay, yeah.
Anything to do with the construction trades industry. But what I did alongside that is I invested a lot of time and effort in understanding exactly what had happened to me. I employed coaches at the time. I had a mentor at the time. I did some business courses because I needed to understand, and it goes back to that word risk, that I needed to understand the risk from everything I look at now. My first question is, where's the risk? If I do this job, where's the risk? If I employ this person, where's the risk? Where's my vulnerability? Yeah. I need to understand that. I need to understand if that risk is realised, what that means for me. Is that something I can handle? Is that something I can mitigate? It was probably 2 or 3 years of working with business coaches, other people in the industry that had bigger companies that I effectively latched onto anybody that I could learn from. And over that sort of 2 or 3 years, I developed quite a good understanding of what had happened, and why it had happened without me even realizing it. So it's I got to a point probably 3 years after the wheels fell off where I felt, right, I can probably go again, but I've got more than hammer, chisel and tape measure in my toolbox now. I actually know how to set up the company. I know how to you know, structure the indemnity insurance, so it protects me when I'm doing this element of the work. And I know what I know what my ideal client is. I know, I for example, the first sort of management team that I put together, I employed psychometric testing, which I'd never used before.
Yeah.
I'd done a lot of research on it. I'd done quite a lot of work on it. And when in the construction industry, if we get to, as business owners, if we get to the point where we go, right, we need someone to handle the admin, we're just grateful. Most people are just grateful for the first person that puts their hand up. And that, a worse approach you could not take.
Yeah.
You need to understand, first of all, you need to understand what you're good at as a business owner.
Sure.
And that could be, I'm a carpenter and I'm really good at carpentry. If you're not good at the business side of it, it then comes back to the who, not how.
Yeah.
As the business owner, you've got to be the orchestrator of that business's success. If that means effectively you are just a behind the scenes puppet master, putting the right person in the right place to do the right job, then that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
That's where success leads.
Goes back to what you were saying earlier on though about being a construction worker, doing it all yourself, and all that. That's that delegation, isn't it? A lot of people won't delegate. I can do that. It's going to take me 3 hours to show them to do that. I can do it in half an hour.
Yeah.
But they don't understand the knock-on effect, and how they can free up their own time to spend more time on more valuable tasks, if you like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think any sort of business owner that has been on the tools, you employ subcontractors on site. You know if they're doing a good job or they're doing a bad job. Do you've got to ask yourself, do I have the knowledge to know whether my sales and marketing guy is doing a good job? Or the HR guy, or, do I have the knowledge to do that myself? The answer is almost definitely no. So, why would you take that role on yourself? You'd have to be nuts. You need to find someone that can do that role for you. But going back to the psychometric testing, that starts with yourself. You've got to understand exactly what you're good at, how you tick, what you're good at.
Personality type.
Absolutely, personality type. If you're good at big picture thinking, for example, you can say to your team, there's the goal over there, there's the big shiny goal over there, it's going to take us 3 years to get there. You've done your bit. You've, as the CEO or whatever, if you like, you've shared the vision. You've made everybody aware of the vision. Because of the way my personality type works, someone can say that to me. My immediate reaction is, right, that's 500 steps away. What's step 1, 2, and 3? If you haven't got that within you, you need that person on your team.
I think also as well, I think a lot of people listening may turn around and say, well, yeah, that's all well and good if you've got the resources, you've got the financial resources, but I'm a new guy, I don't have these and that. But maybe you can elaborate on this, but at that early stage, they need to differentiate and understand the difference between cost and investment. If you invest in somebody that frees up your time to do something you're good at, but a lot of people don't understand that concept, do they? Just see everything as a cost. They don't see that they are investing by getting somebody else to do it. They see, I haven't got enough resources. Well, you can if you work it properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you can. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, because again, with construction and trade-based businesses, we deal in the tangible. So we build a house, you can see a house in front of you. That's kind of how our brain works. So to allocate funds, resources on things that we don't really understand, or we can't quantify, we can't touch, HR policies, operations manuals, whatever that may be, it's almost not valid in our own minds, and we don't assign the importance that it deserves. If you've got a job on and you've got 2 labourers and you need an extra 2 labourers because you've got a load of stuff to shift, you'll add that to the job and you'll charge the customer for it. Why would you do any different when it comes to the back office stuff?
Yeah.
I'm not confident in scaling my business to the next level, so I need to create the resource to pay for that. that goes on the price of the job, or you increase your overheads, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
The cost of not doing that, Ray,
Yeah.
is absolutely huge. Now, for a bricklayer to say, I'm not paying you, I'm not paying a coach 250 quid for this or £1,000 for that, or okay, that's fine as an initial reaction, but actually take it through to its natural conclusion. If you don't do this and you don't understand the risk on this £500,000 job, and the wheels come off, you've lost the £500,000 contract. You could be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds out of pocket. All of a sudden, that 250 quid or that £1,000 investment on mitigating that happening in the first place seems pretty insignificant. And it's a real sticking point that business owners need to get their head around, that investing in that, in whether it's coaching, whether it's mentoring, whether it's business programs, whatever it may be, is as important as going to college and learning the trade in the first place. Yeah. Probably more so.
Yeah.
Probably more so, and it's, I'm fortunate now. I mean, we've touched on the dark side of things with the suicide statistics, etc. But I came out the other side of that, and at the time it was horrendous. I now look back on it, and I'm incredibly grateful, because what I learned from that, nothing. There's nothing in the world you can do that has the same effect on you as looking in your family's eyes and telling them,
yeah, I can imagine,
everything's gone.
Yeah.
You can't buy that. You cannot buy that. So I now look back on that from an incredibly grateful perspective, because the lessons I've learned and the forced learnings that those situations have encouraged me to undertake has put me where I am now. And I mean, when the business failed, I had 65 guys on site.
Wow.
That's 65 guys I have to go to. And don't forget, this is 2007, 2008. There's not a lot of work out there.
No, not at all.
Not a lot of work out there.
And you had to go and make them redundant. And
I had to go and speak to every single one of them.
Heartbreaking.
Individually.
Yeah.
And some of those, 3 of those guys had been with me since they left school. Yeah. I took them on as apprentices. I trained them up. In my head, those guys were retiring with me in 50 years, 50 years time.
Yeah. And
I had to lay them off. And these kids, because they were kids when they came to me, I had relationships with their parents. The parents were, their 16-year-old son, they want to sort of hand him over to a big burly builder, take my son onto a building site and teach him how to earn a living. And I saw that as a huge responsibility, massive responsibility. So I had relationships, I had a rapport with the parents. Yeah. And that, that it was horrendous.
Yeah, absolutely
horrendous. Again, I'm grateful for the experience. I'm not grateful for the position they found themselves in as a result of my business. But again, the lessons were huge.
Yeah, those life experiences, work experiences, you still need the knowledge, you need the frameworks, the business frameworks, but those personal experiences are worth their weight in gold. Because if somebody's listening now and they want to talk to you, they can contact you outside of this. Those personal experiences, you can help. If you can help one person avoid what you went through, but you won't find that in a textbook. You won't find that in some, seminar somewhere. You've got to experience to know how 100%. That feels. And if we kind of fast forward and then kind of look back to the situation you went through, the lessons you've learned now, and if somebody's listening now, what would you say to them to prepare for that, to overcome that, basically to avoid what you went through? What would you do differently?
I would say, in all honesty, you've done your apprenticeship. You're not finished yet. You need to do your second apprenticeship. And that second apprenticeship, if you want to be a business owner and you want to scale your business, or even if you want to be a successful sole trader, you need to understand the fundamentals of how to run a business. It is absolutely key. It's as important as the plumber tightening that nut up so it doesn't
Would
leak.
you go as far to say as just a single tradesman needs to have that business acumen?
I genuinely would. I would say a lot of sole traders generally tend to scale their business either intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah.
Now that can be down to marketing and various other bits and pieces, and a lot of those sole traders will grow, but they'll grow in a reactive way, not in a proactive way.
Sure.
If you're growing reactively, you're dealing with other people's problems in the moment. That means potentially you're not reacting in the best way for you or for your business. If you can grow proactively and plan, you can grow in a way where you still have absolute control over everything, whether that's working for your ideal client, the sort of people that you need to work for. You know, we can all think back and we can all think, you know, that client was amazing. I'd work for them full time. You know, if I had to work there every day for the rest of my life, I'd be happy. And we can all look back and go, I'm never working for him again or her again. You know, one of the biggest issues with the construction industry is lots of the work comes by word of mouth. Now, the perception is that that's an incredible thing, and to a point, it is, because your reputation is speaking for you. But all those clients that are coming to you through word of mouth, how do you know whether they're the guy that you'd work for every day for the rest of your life or the guy you'd never work for again?
Yeah.
You don't. And what's the key to that? The key to that is marketing. How many business owners have even gone through that 30-second thought process?
Yeah.
They don't. You know, someone comes along and says, there's a 200 grand project. Will you do it for me? You see the pound signs. Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You know, and off you go and you do it. And, you know, if it goes well, great, happy days. But let's not forget, we're dealing with two of the most emotive things in the domestic sector.
Yeah.
We're dealing with two of the most emotive things in the world, their personal home and their personal money.
Yeah.
If you don't structure that job perfectly, if you don't have measures in place, you know, to control the job and to manage the job if things start to go wrong, that £200,000 of which you might have had 50, 40, 30,000 pounds worth of profit in can disappear overnight.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back as well, what you said about materials not being structured, losing so much a day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a sole trader business, and you're quite early on, I think one of the best things you can probably do is sit down with somebody, either a business professional, coach, mentor, and actually share your vision, you know, share your 10-year vision. Because most coaches and mentors are coming from a place of experience. They've done it all before. They've been there. They've made the mistakes. You know, I'm a perfect example. To be able to benefit from somebody that's already done it is absolutely huge. It's absolutely huge, you know. If you can sit down and share that vision with somebody, then, you know, they can help you put in place all the processes, all the systems, all the measures, everything you need to put in place to make that happen, so that you're building the business rather than reacting to the business.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between what you said earlier, working on the business and working in the business. If you're working in the business, you've got a job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just go and get a job with one of the big boys and save yourself all the stress. You're wasting your time. You know, it's very unlikely you're ever going to make any money, because you're not taking the time to control the things you need to control to make the business profitable.
Yeah. I always say, a bit contentious, but I always say you don't really have a business until it can run on its own. You've just got a job, or a well-paid job.
Agreed.
You may have a great lifestyle.
Agreed.
But you don't technically have a business.
No, totally agree. If you can't walk away from your business for a month, go to India, Japan, wherever it may be, come back and your business is still in perfect shape,
Yeah.
you haven't got a business.
Yeah. And there'll be a lot of people listening thinking, that's daft, you know, but trust me, you know, we've both been there. And if you structure it right, if you do have the right processes, systems, you can achieve pretty much anything you want with the right mindset, etc.
Yeah.
So going back to your, in terms of, thank God you are where you are now, moving on, where where is your journey taking you now then? As you sit here now,
As I sit here now, so after after getting back on my feet when all that when all that happened, I slowly built up the building side of the business again, and I actually really enjoyed it the second time because it was. I think the enjoyment probably came from a confidence.
Yeah.
You know, I'd got my suit of armour back on again. You know, I felt unstoppable from the first time around, but that was really from a place of arrogance and ignorance. I felt unstoppable the second time. The difference being I realised I wasn't unstoppable.
Yeah.
And I took the steps I needed to take.
Yeah.
To prevent anyone from stopping me. And that really was born out of years of experience and, more importantly, years of investing in learning, learning how to run a business effectively. So I built the business back up, and we were just dealing domestically. So going back to the Dolphin Square projects, that's kind of what I call I kind of looked upon that as a commercial arrangement because we were a main contractor from a bigger contractor. So the second time around, I focused solely on residential. The reason I focused solely on residential is because I wanted to be connected to the decision maker and the person holding the purse strings effectively. I didn't want several layers between myself and that person. So I decided to focus solely on residential. I built that up, and that traded very successfully for another sort of 10, 11 years. I had some plans about getting some of my younger sons into the business to sort of start taking over and make my life a little bit easier. But they decided they wanted to do other things, and I think certainly my eldest son, I think that's partly as a result of what he saw me go through. A few years ago.
Yeah.
I think, whether it was a conscious decision or whether it was something burnt onto his subconscious from those experiences, I'm not sure. But, he very respectfully declined my offer. We built the business up, and I kind of stepped away from the business. I didn't sell it as such. I kind of just handed it on as a going concern. Sure. I wasn't really looking for any sort of financial gain from that. I wanted it to continue on the sort of values that I'd set it up with, because it was doing a great job. It's
very important.
Yeah, absolutely. We were a good building company, and domestically, there's not an awful lot of those around. And that sounds like I'm saying there's loads of rubbish building contractors out there. There are, but it's not entirely their fault. It's the way the industry's structured. It's the way, or the complete lack of entry into the industry, or any sort of sensible route into the industry. So I wanted to keep it going. So that's now ticking over and being controlled by someone else, and I have nothing to do with that now. And that was really because what I started doing about 3 years ago, I started helping some small, medium-sized business owners in construction, trades-based businesses. Okay. Just I suppose you call it coaching and mentoring, really, but on an unofficial sort of ad hoc basis, I had a funny enough, a friend of mine's son who started his own. He was a carpenter and started his own little building company, and he was starting to have a few problems. And my mate sort of came to me and said, you've been through the mill a couple of times. Can you? Any chance you could just help him out a little bit? So I did, and I'm still sort of not working with him as such now, but he'll still ring me up and say, I've got this or I've got that. And I really, really enjoyed it. And not only did I enjoy it, but I really valued it, and it fulfilled me personally, because what it gave me the opportunity to help people avoid the mess that I'd created for myself.
Yeah, but it is so rewarding when you can give back.
100%.
And if you see somebody who, I don't know, didn't even know what cash flow looked like, and all of a sudden they're making business decisions and you can see them growing, yeah, there's nothing better. And with the ups and downs you've had in your work life, you can't buy that experience. You can't, as I said earlier, look in a textbook and get that. So if you can impart that with somebody who is in the early stages of their development, yeah, that's marvelous. Yeah,
It is, and it really you know, it fills you with that sort of warm fuzzy feeling. You know, it's because it's so easy. You know, and as business owners, you tend to isolate yourself a little bit anyway. You know, because you're always busy and you're just cracking on. And you can end up disappearing down a rabbit hole without even realising you've entered the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You know,
and those projects where it's like the carrot, all of a sudden they're drawing you in, your exposure, as you said, risk, you know, oh, don't worry about this job. We'll pick it up on the next job. We'll pay you on there. So they're drawing you. All of a sudden, you look behind you and you've got this massive gaping hole of financial exposure. So if you, and because they're busy, because they're in the job, they don't actually realise what's going on behind them or around them because they're so involved in delivering perfect, you know, carpentry or whatever it may be. So that experience alone, again, because it's intangible, what you said earlier about builders like intangible products, that intangible knowledge, and as you say, broaden their toolkit, will save them, depends on the scale, but thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and save them a happy home life.
I think
balance.
I think that's realistic. I think if you look over a 40, 50 year working career, whatever it may be, I don't think, depending on the size of the venture, I don't think hundreds of thousands is unrealistic. You know, I genuinely think hundreds of thousands is a real figure.
Yeah.
You know, if you're dealing with a much bigger company, that could go into the millions easily.
Yeah.
But I just if I can just pick up on a point that you just made there. You know, you talked about cash flow on a job and potentially robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, so your cash flow's tight on 24 Norfolk Avenue, but you've got this job going on over here at 18 Acacia Avenue. If you are ever in the position where you've got to fund this job from that job, stop now. Stop right now. Do not do it. Yeah. The second you do that, you're turning one failing job into two failing jobs.
Yeah.
You know, do not do it. Do not do it. Stop right now. I mean, I could talk for 4 hours on that subject alone. But every single contractor, me included, has done that at some stage in their life.
Indeed. Yep.
Don't do it. Stop.
I say to a lot of my guests this question, I kind of put them on the spot to a degree, but if there was three key points that you would ask them, anybody listening who is either thinking of scaling a business or starting a business or has a business that they not quite sure where they're going, what would be the three key points that you would say you need to consider these three areas?
So I think number one would be clarity of vision. So you need to, as the business owner, you need to understand exactly what that looks like. If it's a 3-year plan, great. 5-year plan, great. 10-year plan, great. But that vision needs to be crystal clear. You cannot achieve a vision, or no one can help you achieve a vision that you don't really understand, or you don't know what it looks like. So that is absolutely key. Get the vision for your business absolutely clear. That also includes the vision of yourself within that business. What do you look like within that business?
Their role.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, are you still going to be on the tools in 10 years? Are you going to be sitting on a beach spending an hour on a phone?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they're two examples to make extreme examples to make the point, but it's really, really key. The second one, get some help. Get some help, whether that's a coach, whether it's a mentor, get some help, because you can't do it on your own. You cannot do it on your own. Any good coach or any good mentor, you know, we've all got our limitations. We've all got areas of experience that we haven't experienced, or, you know, subjects we don't know an awful lot about. a good coach they won't try and, if you ask a question that they don't know something about, they're not going to sugarcoat it or flower it up. A good coach will go and find that information out, or they will bring somebody in that's got experience in that. So don't isolate yourself. Don't think, right, there's my 10-year plan, off I go. You're never going to get there.
Yeah.
On your own, you're never going to get there. But that's why I put vision first, because vision is so key. If you're going to employ the services and the support of a coach or a mentor, your vision has got to be as crystal clear to that coach or mentor as it is to you. You can't chop it and change it and get that nailed down before you sit in front of somebody and ask for help. So get your vision clear, employ help. It comes back to the how, not the who, not how again.
Sure. Yep.
You are going to need, and the coach you work with on day one, you might work with every month until you get to that 10-year vision. You might work with them for 3 months, 6 months, decide it's not really working out, or it's not a good fit. Find somebody else.
Yeah.
Find somebody else. There's coaches and mentors out there. Not everyone is a perfect fit for everybody else, but you need to find somebody that you gel with, that you're on board with, that you can strike up a good rapport with, that understands your vision, and you're confident they can help you get there.
Well, if you take every great sportsman or business, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Tiger Woods, Muhammad Ali, they all had coaches and mentors.
Absolutely.
And it's strange that smaller companies, people at the start of their journey feel they don't need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hang on a minute. Well, Elon Musk and these guys have got people they relate to. Why not you?
They need it more than anybody else.
Yeah.
At that particular time. If you wake up and decide you're going to start a construction-based business, the first thing you need to be thinking is, who can I speak to help me structure day one? That's the bottom line. You're absolutely right. Every successful person, and that includes, we mentioned Richard Branson earlier. Do we think he's just some sort of freak genius of nature? No, he's not.
Yeah.
No, he's not. He's a charismatic, intelligent man, but he's been guided by hundreds and hundreds of people over his career, coaches, mentors, peers. You need that. You need to surround yourself with the people that can get you where you want to be.
Yeah, the mastermind. Yeah,
masterminds. Absolutely. There's so many options out there, but the single worst thing you can possibly do is try and do it on your own, because you can't do it.
Yeah,
you can't do it. I've tried and failed.
Yeah,
it can't be done.
Yeah, but it's actually difficult to just encapsulate in words the benefits and the rewards you will get by having the strength of character. That's what it boils down to actually put your hand up and ask for help.
Yeah. And the value in having somebody that, how many times do you get asked a question as a business owner that you don't know the answer to? You fluff the answer, or, someone once said to me, it doesn't matter whether the answer is right or wrong. If you say it confidently enough, people will believe you. And I think there's an element of truth in that, but at some point that's going to come back and bite you. At some point you are going to have to know the right answer. Yeah. And how much value, if you've got a client, my client's upset, something's not quite right, how valuable is it to have someone that you can just pick the phone up to and go, I've got this situation. What's your input? How do you think I should handle it?
And also that they've been in that position before because they've got industry experience. Yeah. So yes, go out and get a mentor, preferably find somebody like yourself who is in the industry and who has the knowledge and who has actually made that same decision. Oh, don't do that. It cost me 20 grand. You need to get around it this way.
Yeah.
You can get around it this way or that way. That in itself is invaluable because you may have the business framework, but when you've got the industry knowledge as well, you can apply it in different ways. And that's critical.
Absolutely. And I think that experience as well, that real life experience in the industry as well. I mean, something that a couple of times I've sort of highlighted with some of the people that I work with is sometimes tiny little incremental things can happen. I don't know, just find a good example. Your wage bill in terms of percentage of turnover goes up a couple of percent, One, if you haven't got the right systems and processes in place, you probably wouldn't even realise that anyway. But it's a small little marker that the less experienced might not take an awful lot of notice of.
Yeah.
But then there could be another small little marker in a totally unconnected part of the business that flags up at the same time.
Yeah.
If you've got a lot of industry experience, you're going, oh, hang on a minute, there's something there, there's something bigger going on here.
Yeah.
As a first timer or someone that's never been through that experience, you don't know that.
Yeah.
You don't know that. And you know, to benefit from someone's experience that has been there, has built a business, has scaled a business, has lost it all overnight, and then built it again, the lessons, you know, as I said earlier, you know, you go bed at 11 o'clock at night, you lay there all night, you don't sleep, you stare at the ceiling, you know, you're up again at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
That's not a lesson you can buy. You know, the lessons are they're burnt onto your brain when you've been through experiences like that, you know, and as you said earlier, you know, you cannot learn that stuff out of a textbook.
Number 3. You don't give me number 3, have you?
I would say number 3 at this stage. I think vision, help are the first 2 things. I think the third thing would be start to get your mind and your perception into thinking about the risk in everything you do. Everything you do carries a risk. You know, it carries an upside, but it carries a risk. Try and start thinking like that. You know, any coach or mentor would work with you to develop that skill anyway. But I mean, it's something that I didn't even consider in my younger days. You know, I didn't even consider it. I need the materials, I'll order them. You know, submit an invoice, paid.
Don't ask what the consequences are.
Exactly that.
If I do this, what's the consequence?
Exactly that. I did an exercise in my business once. This was before we had any sort of purchasing, purchasing systems and processes in place to track materials, make sure stuff was going back, make sure we were ordering from a bill of quantities rather than, you know. And I did effectively a before and after, and it was tens of thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
And this was when we were doing fairly low value contracts, so we didn't have huge turnover. But when I actually studied it, it was tens of thousands of pounds. Yeah. Because I'd done that risk analysis, I now understood the risk associated with, you know, ordering materials on an ad hoc basis. You know, anyone that picks up the phone to order materials, don't do it. Yeah. Don't do it. You should be sending emails, purchase orders, quotes. You know, there should be a paper trail. You should be logging everything. Where those materials, you know, one order for multiple sites. Don't do it. You know, just don't do it.
I know. Yeah.
But it's something I had to go through and experience, and then work out how to test to actually realise it. But I went for years not even thinking about that stuff.
I know. They don't job number, they don't itemise it.
No.
So you don't know where the costs are going.
No, because most small business owners will, well, that's just another layer of admin that I don't need to do, you know. And it's like, well, that's fine, but that means that all the important information for this business is where? It's in your head. Where else is it? Nowhere. Yeah. Have you ever tried taking over a small business that's only got 1 or 2 people? You can't do it because the entire business is in that person's head. Yeah. You know, you need to have a successful and scalable construction business. As the business owner, you need to be able to walk away from that on a Monday, not go back to a Friday and know it's going to be okay. Assuming you've got the people in there to, you know, you're of a size where you've got the people in there to do it. Then you can call yourself a business owner. Yeah. You know, but yeah, that would be my third thing. I think understand your vision. So a clear vision, because that will help you and it will help the people that are going to help you get the right help. Absolutely key. Before you do anything else, you know, before you buy that new breaker or you buy a new cement mixer or, you know, spend hours and hours and hours fine tuning your logo, not important by the way, get the right help. Yeah. And then start to think in terms of risk, you know, understand the risk in absolutely everything you do. Because once you start thinking from a risk profile perspective, you'll be going, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going." You know, it just starts to train the brain in the right way of thinking. Yeah,
I thoroughly enjoyed this. If people want to contact you, and I know, you am I right in saying that you're actually mentoring people now? You're looking for people.
Yeah, so we didn't finish that off, did we? But yeah, so I effectively what I'm now doing is off the back of, you know, helping a number of people on an ad hoc basis. Effectively, I knew there was a need out there. I knew there was a market out there. I've been quite surprised by the size of that market. So I decided to professionalise it effectively. So most of my time now is spent. I mean, I've still got a small plumbing and heating company running in the background, and so I'm still actively working within the industry. We've got some property development stuff going on, but the majority of my time now I'm spending coaching and mentoring.
Oh, great.
New
Giving back.
startups. Yeah, giving back, absolutely. New startups and sort of small to medium size, you sort of 1 to 5 million.
So if anybody's listening now then that would like to benefit from those experiences, how can they contact you?
Probably the easiest way, most people are on LinkedIn. Probably the easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. Just search for Wayne Sandford and up I'll come. It's quite obvious that it's me. It's got my MCIOB accreditation, the chartered status in there. So that's probably the easiest way to connect with me.
Okay, well, that's marvellous. Well, thanks so much, Wayne. And I'm so glad things did turn around for you.
Thank you.
I wouldn't have got to know you. I enjoy your company, and yeah, long may it continue. And I'm sure if things continue to work out the way they are, and you are able to give back, there'll be hundreds of business owners, small and large, that are going to benefit from your experience. So yeah, full marks. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Ray. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.